All right, I'm going to do a video on section 13.1. In this section, we're looking at the difference between simple and compound interest, and we just are needing to learn how to use the formulas. All right, there'll be some questions on this section that you should be able to do after you watch this video, or if you were in class to see the section covered. Okay, so if we borrow money today, we have to pay a larger amount later. And if we deposit money today, we're going to have a larger amount in our account later. That increase in value is known as interest. So it can be applied to both money you borrow, and the interest would be how much you have to pay for that privilege, or interest can be the amount you earn when you deposit money in a bank account. Okay. The amount of the loan or the deposit is called the principal. The interest is usually computed as a percent of that principal, and the percent is called the interest rate, or sometimes we just say rate. Interest rate, or simply the rate. Okay. The rate of interest is assumed to be an annual rate, meaning a rate that applies for the entire year, unless otherwise stated. And then interest that's calculated only on principal is called simple interest. But if you have interest that's calculated on the principal plus any interest you earned previously on that principal, that's called compound interest. And it's the secret to growing your money, trying to find ways, different investment vehicles that allow you to compound interest. Okay. All right. Now, the simplest interest formula is this, and you might guess what the different parts refer to, but there are some things you need to know. So I stands for interest. Okay. So I is the interest. The P is the principal. The R is standing for the interest rate, and it is the annual interest rate. And then T is the time, and it's important you realize it's in years. So here's a problem we'll do, and this is on the harder end of the type you'll do. So if we want to find the simple interest we would have to pay to borrow $4,800 for 6 months at 7%, we could use the formula. Okay. In place of P, I'm going to put the $4,800. Place of R, I need to put that in as a decimal. So percent means divide by 100. 7 divided by 100 would be 0.07. Okay, so I'm going to multiply by 0.07. And then I need to multiply by a time. And here's the tricky part. It needs to be in years. So I have to convert from 6 months into years. 6 months is when you know there's 12 months in a year. So 6 months would be 1/2 of a year. All right. To do this, if you had one that wasn't so easy to tell, you can take your months and divide by 12, and it'll give you the number of years. Okay. So this would be times 1/2 or 0.5. Needs to be the time in years. All right. And then you just work that out. This is showing your work, showing me what you plugged into the formula. And then you just use your calculator to work it out, and you get $168. So that's the interest that you had to pay to borrow that money. Now, how much you would have to repay? What would the borrower have to repay? Well, I've got to give the person that I borrowed the money from, I have to give him the $4,800 back, but then I'm also going to have to pay him the $168. So the amount repaid, okay, that would have to be 4,800 plus 168, wouldn't it? Or $4,968. Okay, so that'll come back later in a second. We're going to look at a formula that would have allowed us to find that in one step. So the total amount repaid is the maturity value or the value of the loan. Okay. And then they a lot of times use this language. It will be referred to as the future value, or the future amount. And the future amount is kind of where the A that we'll see in a second comes from in the formula. This A right here is really the future amount. Okay. All right. The original principal that was denoted P can also be thought of as the present value, like how much you have now. Okay. How much you're planning to deposit, or how much you are borrowing currently. Okay. So here's the formula that would have allowed us to get the total amount repaid in one step. So if P is the principal and you borrowed this money at R, an interest rate R, for T years, and it was a simple interest type situation, then you can determine the future value, or the future amount you'd have by using this formula. So from before, if I put the 4,800 in here and then did 1 plus the 7%, now this is from this problem above, so I'm looking at that problem above, the 7%, and I multiplied it by the time in years, the 1/2, what happens is the formula calculates the interest but also adds it back to the 4,800. And so you'd wind up, once you type that in, of getting the 4,968 directly. So you see, it's really the same as what we did earlier. P times 1, see the P and then parentheses 1 plus RT, that means the same as P plus PRT. So this is your principal plus right here, the interest, and that will give you the total amount repaid. So you might want to just continue doing those problems by doing 2 steps, finding the interest and then adding it back to your principal like we did here. Okay. But we now have a formula we can use to do that directly if we prefer. And this would be the formula that we could use to do that. Okay. You'll have the formulas on any assessment you have. You just need to be sure you can use them. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and work these 2 problems. All right. This one is asking us, number 2 is asking us for the future value of $460 in 8 months if the annual interest rate is 12%. And I probably should have clarified that it was being done using simple interest. You kind of assume that if you don't see any information about compounding periods, okay, which we'll talk about later. So here we're going to go ahead and just grab the formula that we just learned about. And then we'll plug in the 460 for the principal. We'll plug in the interest rate. Now 0.12 would be the same as 12%. 12% means 12 divided by 100, and that would wind up being 0.12. So interest rate is 0.12, and then the time again is months. So I'm going to need to take the 8 divided by 12. And when I do, I get 2/3. All right. Sometimes it doesn't matter whether you write something as a fraction or a decimal, like 1/2 is the same as 0.5, and we didn't round or anything. They're just exactly the same. But 2/3 would be 0.6 repeating. And if you put in 0.6, that would be completely wrong. If you put in 0.7, which would be correct in terms of the rounding, you've still rounded. So you're not really getting an exact answer. It's best just to leave the fraction as 2/3. And then this would wind up being $496.80 when you're finished. Okay. All right. Now, again, you could have just calculated. So you could have found the interest, found I, by doing the principal times the rate. Oops, that was the previous problem. This one's 12%. The principal times the rate times the time. Okay. And that would have been $36.80. And then in another step, taken the original principal plus that interest to get the $496.80. So those are the two ways that you could do it. Okay. Now, question number 3 is a little bit tougher, because on this one, the question is, if we found we have this account where I can earn 6% interest. The question here is, what would we need to deposit now so that its value will be $3,500 after 2 years? So the $3,500 is not the principal, it's the future value. It's what I'm going to have in the long run. So when we're thinking about that formula, it's pretty clear where the 6 goes. Okay, and the time was 2, so I know to do that, and that was 1 plus. It's just that we don't know P. We know A is 3,500. We know the future value. We want to know what the present value would be. All right, so this requires a little bit of algebra. You've come from 98, or you've placed it here directly, so we kind of feel like you can handle this. So we could just divide both sides by 1 plus 0.06 times 2. Problem is, you have to be pretty careful over there on that left-hand side when you go to evaluate that. So watch it, because this horizontal fraction bar is a grouping symbol. So that denominator would need to be worked out. And if you're going to try to enter it in one step, so if you're going to try to enter this in one step, okay, you don't just go 3,500 divided by 1 plus 0.06 times 2, because that's only going to divide 3,500 by 1, get that answer, and then add. You need an extra set of parentheses. Okay? So what you might want to do instead of doing that is work out. Instead of doing that, you may want to work this out right here. So that denominator turns out to be 1. Let's see, I think it was 1.12. Shoot, I don't have my calculator with me. There it is. Okay, so 1 plus 0.06 times 2 turns out to be 1.12. No rounding or anything, and then 3,500 divided by 1.12 turns out to be 3,125. Okay, so the answer to the question is, I would have to deposit $3,125 today in an account that paid 6% interest. I'd have to leave it there for 2 years in order to have $3,500 at the end of those 2 years. Okay.